Conservative voice, not on behalf of his party, but he had another previous commitment at this very time elsewhere in Ottawa, and he could not be two places at once.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Hi, Sharon Somerville from Waterloo. Just want to say we have two co-chairs here from Waterloo tonight. We drove all night to get here from Waterloo. So, I have a lot to say. I was a co-author of that amendment to Resolution 31. I know exactly how that process went down, and I would say, with all respect, Craig, your representation of the process within the party of how Resolution 31 was created wasn't entirely accurate. Having been there, I know exactly what happened. There was a resolution that I co-authored with Jen Ross, who is also a very active Liberal for fair voting, and it was called the Continuation of the Democratic Reform Policy. It had a number of elements to it. We worked it through the process. Ultimately, it made its way to caucus. And Joyce Murray and Craig Valeriot and Stephen Dion championed the policy that Jen Ross and I wrote. It was up against Ralph Goodell's policy on parliamentary reform. There's no way that our policy could have competed with the policy of Ralph Goodell's. So the compromise that was made was that the absolute meat and potatoes of our resolution got attached to Ralph's resolution so that it would pass, and it did pass. So I actually would like to say that I do think that there is more interest in reform than you are crediting the Liberal Party for. And I would also like to suggest that and there is resistance, there's no question there's resistance, but if anybody in this room wants to really address resistance within the Liberal Party, I would suggest that people do what I did on the recommendation of Fair Vote, which is to join a party and make sure it happens. Dr. Brian Tangay, who was one of the authors of the Law Reform Commission report, said at a Liberal AGM, which he was invited to and which he addressed, that the Liberal Party is the linchpin of ensuring that we see a fair voting system in Canada, because it will take the three parties to make this work. So if you want to see electoral reform in Canada, consider, I'm not telling you to, but consider joining the Liberal Party and working at the EDA level like Jen Ross and I have. And honestly, we had great success, right? We moved that forward with the help, the enormous help and intelligence of Dion, Valeriot, and Murray. That's how it's really going to happen. Yes, there's resistance, but each and every one of us in this room, as evidenced by Jen Ross and myself, can make a change within the Liberal Party. The other thing is that there is new blood coming to the Liberal Party, and each and every person that contributes to that process is contributing to moving the argument forward, moving the debate forward in the Liberal Party. Thanks, Sharon.
Would you mind if I just add a little bit, just to emphasize what Sharon is saying with respect to the little caucus that we have there and the role that they played with respect to that resolution, without getting into all the minutiae of how resolutions now come forward to convention, but basically there are 14 entities, if you want to put it that way, of which caucus is one, that put forward 10 resolutions that go to convention, of which the number one resolution automatically goes to plenary. So it's considered a priority resolution. Doesn't need to go through further vetting in the workshop process. And Resolution 31 was the number one resolution voted by the Liberal caucus. So they looked at in excess of 50 resolutions that came from caucus itself, adopted 10 of them, of which Resolution 31, to repeat, was the number one resolution. So yes, there's, you know, resistance, no doubt, but that resolution would not have been adopted, and it was overwhelmingly adopted, astronomically adopted in the plenary with the support of grassroots there, but I think only because it came from Congress. So, just to, okay.
Do you want to respond, or Bruce, do you have anything else to add to that?
Nope. I think that we'll be getting into the weeds. I don't actually,
Okay.
neither of what I heard is actually inconsistent with what I said.
Okay.
And keep in mind, I work beside the 6 Liberal caucus MPs who made sure that got in Goodale's resolution, which it was not in before.
Okay. Move along.
I'm Judith Thomas. I'm from Ottawa, long-term resident here. But as you can hear, I'm originally from Germany. I have always thought Canadian electoral system as extremely undemocratic. What I don't also understand is why in Canada do we continue to try and reinvent the wheel? The Law Commission of Canada, to my knowledge, was an independent commission that was set up under the Prime Ministership of Jean Chrétien, and it delivered a report that was widely hailed as groundbreaking. Why does the Liberal Party, instead of going into a wishy-washy resolution that will allow all sorts of interpretations, why does it not just re-adopt the report of the Law Commission of Canada and start an education campaign based on that? That is my first question. My second question is, why did both the NDP and the Liberal Party totally reject, out of hand, Elizabeth May's proposal shortly after the last election that the 3 opposition parties should form an informal coalition for one election only, with the sole purpose of working together to elect a progressive government that could then work to bring in electoral reform. And once that was done, then all the parties could go their way again. Why was that rejected out of hand, which would have brought us so much closer to this important goal? All of us who are here recognize that nothing in Canada will change unless and until we change the electoral system to reflect the diversity of views and to give a voice to the different political opinions that exist in the parties and in the country. So these are my questions.
Quick questions, short answers. The first is that we have 2 natural governing parties in their own minds, and they don't really want to change the system. There's passive and active resistance. And the answer to the other question is that we have 3 leaders who care more about their egos in their parties than they do about Canada or democracy.
Anybody else like to respond to that question?
Well, I would not disagree with the comment that there's huge vested interest. I would not disagree with that. And I'm not here to defend that, far from it. I'm here more to help the citizenry appeal more strongly to the political process, to the partisan political process. So I don't know how else to answer that. I can't answer why not, other than it's not to the political, which I think we talked about before. It's not to the perceived benefit of the vested interests of political parties and of leadership in political parties.
And your grassroots tie into this vested interest? The grassroots?
Less and less and less. I think that's what I was trying to describe, that less and less so. But again, that concept of as Bruce puts it, the natural governing party is still there within the party, and that's why, as Sharon says, citizens who are concerned about certain interests should be joining with those political parties that represent, in the majority, the rest of their perspectives, and working as hard as they can within to influence that.
Great, thanks, Sheila. Craig, here.
Yeah, I would just say that Elizabeth's proposal, very general as it was, is not something that's fallen on deaf ears. There's a lot of smart people who know what the dynamics are in our broken system. They know what the dangers are in 2015. And it's frankly just too early for that kind of discussion to actually be public. So I have no idea whether Elizabeth and other party leaders are continuing the discussion or not. It could be there, it could be they aren't. I would say that, and again, this is meant to be more of an observation. We've been focusing on the whole idea of trying to get progressive voters behind the NDP and Tom. That's just, it's not a secret. That's what's been going on for the last 2 years. And at the moment, as I said, we have this 30 universe that goes up and down a bit more, depending on the polls. You have to discount Liberal vote by 5 to 6% in Quebec. So those figures actually distort the national figures because of the concentration of votes. And the question then becomes, in that context, what kinds of risks are parties willing to take? And I personally am of the view that the double goal of getting rid of Stephen Harper, the Conservatives, and doing it in a way that can actually not put us all in this position every frigging election, excuse my language, has to be paramount. That's my personal view. It's just still, I'm sorry to say, it's still too early.
The risk isn't stark enough yet.
Yes, and I think they're still settling out. I mean, there's a battle going on where I think the Liberals kind of feel like they're back in this natural governing mode. I feel it in Parliament and the sort of the psychology of MPs who seem to feel that the leader is somehow or other brought them back to that position. Let's say the softness of the support and the trend lines on the support don't really point in that direction, but that is a kind of feeling. And so it's kind of meant that it's hard to have that conversation when there's a sense that we're the only option. And I'm not saying the NDP is in any better position, because we personally believe Tom is such an incredibly strong leader, and that we stand for a lot that Canadians really want to see by way of change. But we're also still in that mode. We want to be the party that everybody recognizes can do the job. Both parties are thinking that way right now. So I'm just trying to be frank that it's still too early.
Okay, thanks, Craig. I just received a note and asked if you guys could speak into your mics. I think they can't hear you in the back, so, or pull the mics forward a little bit, that would be great. Julian, would you like to go with your next question?
Thank you. By the way, I do agree with Sharon that we have to be cross-partisan. We are a multi-partisan organization, but as I was getting politicians to sign the pledge, we had a few provincial candidates that signed the pledge, I realized that some of our supporters who are very, who are working for parties or are very supporters of a particular party, they wouldn't change their vote, even regardless of who signed the pledge and who didn't. And I think it's time to ask our supporters to be multi-partisan. Right now, the Auto Centre candidate, the NDP Auto Centre candidate has not signed the pledge. out in Carleton, Mississippi Mills, the Green Party candidate has not signed the pledge. He has refused to. Or actually, he changed it. He crossed out proportional representation and wrote electoral reform on it and then signed it. I'm taking that as a refusal to sign. So that's my comments. I'm right now a member of the Green Party of Ontario, but federally I'm a member of the Liberal Party of Canada, so I do think we need to be cross-partisan. Sorry, my question, but actually with regards to the pledge, is Craig, are you in favor of, because I think our pledge is our measuring stick to success. The more candidates we have, the more elected candidates we have signing the pledge, the closer we are to our goal. Craig, are you in favor of NDP MPs signing the pledge? If not, how do we reward it? And perhaps Sheila would also have comments. Are you have comments about our pledge and how it would be rewarded? Thank you.
All NDP MPs have been told by me that I've signed the pledge, and that all NDP MPs have been told by me that I've signed the pledge, and that they're welcome to do it, make their own judgment. I think everybody in this room has to realize most MPs are like me, they don't like pledge politics. And I'm going to be frank here, it's an Americanization of politics in a way that I do not find healthy. Because of this being so important, and because of my particular role, I've signed the pledge. But it's not without a struggle, because we have this sort of inchoate policy in the NDP that we don't sign pledges because of the kinds of ultimatum-style politics it leads to. So that's what you're facing with individual MPs. They're wrestling between saying, yeah, hell yeah, I support this, versus don't like to sign pledges. So just be aware of that tension.
The difference between pledging a speed bump in the back lane and a pledge to democracy. Surely there could be an exception for a pledge to democracy.
No, and we've made that exception. And so that's the way maybe to be arguing it. And we can talk further about me re-messaging this if you've been going to MPs and asking them and they've said no. But I'm not sure that that's
We have received some NDP pledges as well on the federal level.
So I think it's just a coordination issue right now. On this one, keep in mind that we still don't like pledge politics.
Bruce, did you want to say something?
I think, unfortunately, with respect to I can't speak to the provincial circumstance. I can't. I'm not familiar enough. But I think certainly with respect to the federal situation, unfortunately, the difficulty that you have is the platform and the binding of the leaders' binding of votes to the platform. And so you will find candidates, and particularly potential candidates, who want to be green-lit to get into the nomination process, reluctant to sign any pledge on anything whatsoever, not knowing what's going to be in the platform. It's just a difficult tactical.
Bruce, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, a mantra that I say to myself quite often is know where you stand and then go and stand there. It's back to the fundamental problem here, which is that MPs, for the most part, there are exceptions, work for the parties more than they work for either conscience or Canada or their constituents, and are pressured in a variety of subtle and not so subtle ways. The subtle ways include just team spirit, hockey team mentality, take one for the keeper, that kind of thing. It's very worrisome to me, and it's a catch-22, because if we got proportional representation in coalition governments and got MPs out from under the thumb of the parties and the leaders, we could pass legislation like this. And without that, it's hard to pass this legislation. It's a real catch-22, and I don't have a magic solution to it, except for renewed pressure and constant pressure, and occasionally some real anger. Canadians are very polite. That's the good news, and sometimes it's the bad news.
So we'll keep going. Let's try to make our questions quick and the answers quick. We're running over already, so we'll try to get through these quickly and then break for lunch. Elizabeth, do you want to go ahead?
Elizabeth Johansson from Edmonton. And what I'd like to say is I think one of the important things going forward is crafting our messaging and trying to win the hearts and minds, because I think that Canadians have an inherent sense of themselves as wanting fairness. And I think that's something that we need to build on. And in talking to the people from the different parties that are already partisan on how to build support within their own parties, I'm wondering, maybe each of you could give what you think the kind of sound bite to hook people's interest that are the partisans within your party. When we're going out and talking to people from different parties, what's that kind of little soundbite hook that can maybe get them interested and get them into a deeper conversation with us about why proportional representation is so important?
Sure, first.
I quite often say in a variety of groups or to individuals, Parliament is broken, and there are two ways to fix it. One is we need a system of voting which is more proportional, so that if the Purple Party gets 20% of the national vote, they get 20% of the seats. And the other one is we need to end the signing of nomination papers by party leaders. And if those two things happened, we would have democracy and fairness in Canada.
Anybody want to add anything to that?
Sound bites. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what the most effective thing is, but I found that, and I said it in my presentation, I found that people are responding to the link between PR and greater collegiality, cooperation, and it's harder for them to see, but there are, and so we'd have to leave it there. There is a little bit of granting a little bit more independence to MPs under an MMP version of PR, but it's too complicated. So cooperative, collegial interactions where false majorities cannot ram legislation through, that connection is working. And it's working, here we have to just acknowledge, it's working because of who the government has been for a while and under this current majority. But when I go up and talk, I say it's really important we don't fall into the trap of thinking this is just an instrumental way to get rid of, to make sure one party does not govern. That's just misses the point. And I always talk about how the last election, we elected far more MPs from Quebec than a PR system would have generated. We elected far fewer in Saskatchewan, etc. But we have to give examples, all of us, of who have associations with parties, about why it is ultimately about fairness. And so somehow distilling it to being, we are about fairness, this is unfair, at the same time it will help fix Parliament. I think something that distills that works.
Okay. So Valerie said, I mean, with Liberals, you got to throw back their own language to them and, you know, just try and point out the illogic of it. So, I mean, I would, in terms of soundbite, to the Liberal Party, I would just put a question to them, something I'm just scribbling here. You know, the Liberal Party is about fairness, equality of opportunity, and minority rights. How can you hold that dear without supporting popular representation? I mean, you know, I think that's the way you have to put it to them. This is what you're in favor of. You should be on board.
That's great.
I used to think that Canadians tried to cross the road to get to the middle. And changed my mind when I heard Tommy Douglas speak. It was an exception. And I hoped that Jack Layton would be an exception too. And he disappointed me when he didn't hold the Liberal Party in 2009 in office under condition that proportional representation would be the first legislation. He muffed it. And Craig, I hope you don't muff it, because this next election that we're talking about, 2015, will be rigged. Because the 11 was rigged. And if you don't think so, go to the website takingbackourcountry.ca, and Will Arlo, who was a candidate, explains how it was rigged. And it's a lot more than Pierre Potin. It's a lot more than that. It's bingo cards and so on. So what I'm challenging you to do, Craig, and you to do, Bruce, and the Conservatives that are abandoning their party, I'm talking those that left the caucus and become independent, and I'm talking about those 3 that I know personally who are retiring from politics. 2 in Nova Scotia, after a long stint and with huge pensions, and do nothing but be a trained SEAL. And that's true of the one in Ontario, Scott Reed, that I know personally, and I was in that campaign with him back when I started to study. Anyway, so here's what you must do. Great. I'm going to lend you my thinking cap for the occasion.
That is what it says.
Coalesce enough MPs now in Parliament to take down Harper, to take this government down on a vote of no confidence. Don't wait for another suppressed vote or another unfair election act and another rigged election, another 30 clones, more trained SEALs, 30 more. We need this? So it's your role to pull together all the thinking MPs that want to represent Canadians and take down this government. And then you go to the Governor General and get your permission to form the next government, with the first legislation being proportional representation. And you will have the support of Canadians, whatever their party affiliation is, including the Conservatives that are here today.
Thank you.
Go, Craig. Okay.
Actually, can I just
All right.
say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Just one thing, I won't go into detail, but the gentleman is correct that what he described is technically feasible in the parliamentary system.
Go for it.
Right? No, it's technically feasible. It's not politically feasible. Keep in mind how many Conservative MPs in the end voted against the C-23, the Fair Elections Act, including, I'm sorry to say, Michael Chong. We rented amazing concessions out of them, but nonetheless, there should have been people breaking ranks and they didn't. So we're not going to be getting them on that basis. But keep in mind what an effective campaign Stephen Harper ran in 2008, 2009, about how it would be unconstitutional, illegitimate, undemocratic to actually change government within a parliament without going to an election.
After they were convicted of contempt of
Yeah,
parliament.
right. And 55 to 60% of Canadians still believe that. So big was the lie. And they also believe, still, it's maybe sunk below 50, but around 50% of Canadians think they directly elect the Prime Minister. And so with that kind of mentality, people don't understand our parliamentary system. And believe me, in 2015, just like in 2011, one of the things Harper's going to try to do to creep his numbers up from mid-30s to higher is to create this image of an illicit coalition. Right? So this is what we're facing.
If you stay
Howard, just go ahead.
in the box, you're in prison. And the box becomes a casket.
There's his soundbite.
That's a
Break that one down.
Okay.
Go ahead, Howard, please.
Howard Jaggy from Toronto. some nice things were said earlier today about Andrew Coyne, and I'm prepared to believe that there are people in the media who are sincerely in favor of PR. One of the things, being from Toronto, that strikes me is that arguably the most, or at least the largest, quote, progressive, unquote, newspaper in Canada, the Toronto Star, has adamantly opposed PR. And when I look at various television chat shows, it seems unalterably the case that the majority of the talking heads tell me that Canadians don't understand. We don't understand the political implications, we don't understand constitutional issues, and none of the things like PR have, quote, legs, unquote. One of the things I'd like you to ask, or to comment on, is the role of the media in infantilizing the Canadian voting public. One of the things that really annoys me, of course, is Harper's attempt to destroy the CBC. But I haven't been all that thrilled with the CBC lately. What's the fellow with the dragons, et cetera, who seems to be on all the time? Is there any reasonable thing that people can say in support of a public media and in support of an independent media? Because I think Canadians as a group are being undercut. And I think that we are all being stupefied by what seems to me to be an essentially right-wing media. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have anything to comment?
Only what Larry Gordon said. I think we should clip his presentation if it was being filmed and put it on YouTube. His section on the media, because it's true. I think deep down there's a huge chunk of the media. The media is a funny way to describe it. A huge chunk of the media, both the owners and editors, but also a lot of the Hill, who kind of know deep down that the entertainment, political theater, sort of focus on scandals, superficial personality kinds of issues, is what they think either sells or people want. And they also, I think, understand that under a PR system, they might just have too much of a functioning institution to have that kind of fun with. So it'd be too boring. Yeah.
So there's a couple more questions. I just want to let you know that the lunches are here at the back, so if anybody's starving yet, you can just go and grab your lunch. We'll finish up these questions and
Sam Hirsch from Montreal. I stand here, I guess, as one of the few youth, and I guess one of the few youth as the total membership of Fair Vote Canada. I assume. And I was just wondering if all three of you could briefly respond to what could Fair Vote Canada do, and what could perhaps each of your parties do to make, I guess, the PR movement a more sexy movement for the young voter, or how would you make it more important for them to understand? I guess the media is kind of a reason for things.
I'll start. I think youth and the media both want what Craig just said. They want exciting politics. And I want boring politics. Sustainable, boring, predictable, cooperative politics. But media have said to me quite often, if there's no conflict, there's no story. It is kind of sad. It is kind of a catch-22. I have one practical idea that I've had for a long time. I would like to lower the voting age to 16, because I think it would capture youth at a time when they're open to getting involved. They would learn, they would get involved, and then they might carry those practices, those habits into university, because there are so many distractions in university that take you away from things, boring things like politics. So anyway, I would lower the voting age.
Yeah, specifically on the voting age issue, but I want to bring it back to the PR as well. We actually have a private members bill from Don Davies, the NDP MP, to lower it to 16. That said, it's not a party endorsed private members bill at the moment because it raises major issues. When I did a session with the CEGEP in Quebec, in Longueuil, and there were 40 students in the class, only 3 or 4 of them thought lowering the age was a good idea. And that was because they were self-reflecting on the fact that they were saying, we don't know enough and we're not interested enough. It's like this kind of vicious circle, right? So it has to be, we've got several ideas in the works about how to create that link that Bruce talked about from age 16 up, so that when 18 rolls around, it actually is thought of as one of the milestones. Right at the moment, it's when you can drive, when you can drink, and I don't know if they pay attention to when you can legally have sex, but nonetheless, those kind of milestones are there, but voting tends not to be. On PR, you know what, I think Fairwood probably already does this, but reaching out to some of the more effective, including they use great infographics, organizations like Apathy's Boring, Lead Now, Avaz, and actually seeing whether some joint campaigns could be run. That your future, do you want to stay alienated? If you don't want to be alienated, this is the system for you.
From Norfolk County. I'm wondering roughly, we've heard a great deal about the false ideas, kind of the ideas of imported American ideas and so forth onto a generally parliamentary system and the problems of hyper-polarization within that context and hyper-partisanship. And I suppose the question is, how do you overcome that with the idea of hope and change successfully over what arguably is, I will admit I'm not a fan of Stephen Harper, far from it, but arguably a very crafty practitioner of those politics.
Sorry.
One of those $1 million questions that,
You summarized the whole day here.
I love $1 million questions.
yeah. No, one has to just be aware that one has to be good and maybe just a little bit lucky to counter the machine that the Conservatives have built. The micro-targeting machine that also combines with the deliberate strategy of alienating people. They actually want a huge percentage of the population not to want to vote. It's actually an active part of yeah, and maybe somehow, without going over the top, maybe I just did the way I put it, but one of the messages to people is Stephen Harper wants you not to vote.
Yeah.
Could be one way to get people to vote. I don't know, some sort of reverse psychology.
Could also be a good appeal to some youth.
I'm trying to remember the name of the French philosopher from the turn of the last century who said, a nation of sheep begets a government of wolves.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Jim? Yeah.
I don't have a question, but the comments about media make me recall that almost every single day I look at the paper at media, I see something where a response pertaining to PR is really important. And we have a small active writers group, but we need more people. And if everybody in this room wrote at least one letter for every egregious comment that you see in the paper, it would have a big impact. So that's all I have to say, but thank you very much. It's good points.
Absolutely.